And welcome to the Monday show here on Inside Rugby with Mark. Today I'm going to be talking coaches, yes, the Rugby Championship coaches, how they've been going so far this year in my opinion, and asking you for your opinion about what you think of the coaches so far in this year's Rugby Championship competition. So let's get into it right now. G'day and welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. If you haven't been here before, my name is Mark. I'm a retired Kiwi bloke. I love rugby and I'm living here in beautiful Mexico. So let's talk coaches today, and of course in the Rugby Championship this year we've seen 3 new coaches come in, which has been something of a little bit of a change, and it's been interesting, hasn't it, watching their evolution as we've gone through the season so far. So I thought I'd make a video today talking about their performances so far, what I've seen, and you can let me know what you've seen, what you've liked, what you haven't liked about those respective coaches. Okay, so let's start off with Australia, and Joe Schmidt of course came in after Eddie Jones's demise and took over a very new look Australian Wallaby team. Had players like Michael Hooper were no longer part of the fray, and Quade Cooper and players like that of yesteryear who have moved on from the game. So Joe Schmidt's been responsible for basically building a new team. Of course they had a disappointing World Cup last year, and not only was he looking for new players to come into the squad, but he's also been looking at raising the mentality of this Australian team. Much has been documented and said about the Australian sporting landscape when it comes to the competition of rugby union in that country. We have, of course, the NRL, which is the National Rugby League competition, and we have the Australian Football League, the AFL, which for many years has been competing with rugby union. Now, if you remember back as far as I can, Australia won 2 Rugby World Cups, of course, and no surprise, they still had competition from the National Rugby League and also the AFL back in those days. So I don't quite buy into this excuse, if you like, of the main competition. I think what the problem with Australian rugby is the structure of the game and also the way that the team has been playing over recent years. Well, under Joe Schmidt, we're starting to see a change, and I was excited to see Joe Schmidt come into this position because I thought if there was anyone in world rugby had the right mentality to get this Australian team back on track, it was Joe Schmidt. And I think we've started to see that in this year's Rugby Championship. I know the majority of you have written off Australian rugby at the time being, and some of you have even said the game's going to disappear in the country. Well, I couldn't disagree with you anymore. I think Joe Schmidt is probably going to be the catalyst that gets rugby union back on track. And if you saw what happened in front of 68,000 people in Sydney over the weekend, you've seen already what Joe Schmidt has been doing to this team, and that's one of the things that has really stuck out with me since he started coaching this team. They're going for 80 minutes, and except for that game against Argentina, the second game in Santa Fe in Argentina, the Australians haven't laid down. They've been fighting to the wire. They won that gritty performance, of course, in the first game against Argentina, and look at what they did against the All Blacks last weekend. They're probably up for a very big game indeed. So I give Joe Schmidt a lot of kudos so far for what he's done with this Australian team. He's been loyal to probably most of his players. He's starting to see the right selections that he's making in key positions, and it's starting to bear a little bit of fruit. He just needs a little bit more time. I think by the time this Australian team has gone on their northern tour this year, we're going to see a completely different Wallaby side. I think they're going to get back into the winning fray of things, and they're going to look a lot more polished. They just need a little bit of time to get there. So I think Joe Schmidt's doing a good thing. I think we're seeing some really good things from this Australian team. Their defence, like a lot of people's that I'm going to be talking about today, is not working on some occasions, but when they do throw the ball around and they go wide, they're looking pretty impressive indeed. Now, I know it's not all sunshine and rainbows for the Australian team and for Joe Schmidt at the moment, and I'm not trying to portray it that way. I'm just a guy that's more optimistic than pessimistic. My glass is always half full, and I think Joe Schmidt is going to be the guy that's going to turn it around. So while they didn't win against the All Blacks in the weekend, I think that second half performance was exactly what the Australian public needed to see, as well as the Australian Wallabies team themselves. I think a lot of belief was brought back into them going up against the All Blacks. Yes, they would have got a lot of kudos for winning that first game against Argentina in the last minute, but playing the All Blacks, it's a little bit different, and taking them down to the wire on Saturday was a really, really good result for Joe Schmidt. Now the big thing is they have to back it up in Wellington and play another really good game in that game against the All Blacks. If not win that game, they've got to go very, very close again, and then we can say this Wallabies team has turned the corner. So far for me, Joe Schmidt's doing a good job. I think he's the man for the job, and I'm looking forward to what he can achieve before the end of this year with this Wallabies team. Okay, next up it's Felipe Kapp, and the Argentinian coach has come in after being the assistant coach to Michael Cheika last year, and you can see the evolution of this Argentinian team. They had that historic win against South Africa in the weekend, a fantastic game they played. They took their opportunities when they were there, but they also played some very good expansive rugby. I'm going to be talking about defenses in this video today, and it's because I'm seeing all of the teams having their lackadaisical approach towards defense at different times of the games. South Africa were up 17 points to 0 in that game against Argentina, and then their defense just disappeared. But in addition to that, we saw Argentina having the skill sets to be able to get through the Springboks defence. So there was a bit of give and take on how good or how bad the defence was in that case. But what we're seeing from Kapp is an extension of backing the players that were in that Rugby World Cup last year, bringing in a couple of new guys that are making a difference, and I'm talking about Albanose at number 10. Really liking this guy, and I think he's going to be the future of Argentinian rugby in terms of their management of their game. They've got weapons out wide that can do a lot of things, and Kapp is getting them to play to their actual DNA, and that's what I love about this coach. He's letting them express themselves, and these Argentinian players, you can tell on the field, they feel free, they're using their skill sets, and they're playing some very, very attractive rugby. Now, whilst I don't expect Argentina to beat South Africa in Nelspruit next weekend, I do expect them to go close, and I wouldn't write off a win at all, because I really believe this Argentinian team is growing into something really, really good. Again, I want to wait until the end of the year before I give Kapp my final marks, but I think he's doing a fantastic job with this Argentinian team. They've now moved up to number 6 in the world rankings, and I've said in previous videos, if they get their consistency right, this Argentinian team can compete with the top teams in world rugby on a consistent basis, and that's what I'm really hoping to see from Felipe Kapp and the team that he's putting together. So far what I'm seeing is an outstanding job by this group in Argentina. They've beaten the All Blacks, Australia and South Africa so far in this year's Rugby Championship. That's an historical milestone for them, and I can't wait to see what they do next weekend in South Africa. So I tip my hat to the Argentinian group. I think they're doing a fantastic job, and for me, Felipe Kapp so far is probably being one of the outstanding coaches in world rugby this year. Well done to them all. Okay, moving on to New Zealand and Rassie Robertson, and I just want to preface what I'm about to say with this little bit of information for you all. I wasn't living in New Zealand when the Crusaders went on their historic winning run in the Super Rugby competition, and I didn't take much interest in it either. So for me, I'm a bit of a neutral as far as a Kiwi goes when it comes to Rassie Robertson. I wasn't one of those ones that was blowing the trumpet loud saying he has to be the next All Black coach and all the rest of it. So I've been watching him this year pretty much as a neutral starting off and looking at his performances. Well, you've probably recognised by now throughout my videos that I've got some question marks over what Rassie Robertson is doing with his selection process. I don't agree with what he's doing in some of the key positions. I'm not asking for the whole team to be changed, and some of you in the comments have been referring to me saying those things. That's not the truth. What I've been saying is that I want to see some key positions like number 10 for a start. Number 8 is another one we've got to look at, and we've also got to look at the centres as well. And Robertson, for me, hasn't been giving the younger guys the opportunity that I believe they deserve and we want to see going forward. Now, of course, we're just rugby fans, and that's all we are. We're not part of the makeup of what determines or who the New Zealand rugby coach is. but we have an opinion, and I think it's fair enough for all of us to share that opinion. Now, by the end of the year, Robertson might bounce back and win all the remaining games and be seen in the light of all the rugby pundits in New Zealand as a bit of a hero. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's still some struggles ahead. I think there's some speed bumps ahead. And who's to say that next weekend in Wellington is not going to be one of those games? Now, in the press conference after the game in Sydney in the weekend, Robertson made a comment about, we did enough to win. Well, no, Australia ran out of time on the clock, because I'm sure if there was another 5 minutes, Australia probably would have snatched that game. So as we've all talked about, the New Zealand Achilles heel so far has been their second half performances against all the teams so far in this year's Rugby Championship. I, for one, wasn't impressed with what I saw in Eden Park in the second half. I thought the All Blacks took their pedal off the metal. When Argentina got a little bit more structure in their game and went back to their game plan, New Zealand started to disappear and their bench didn't make an impact at all. Some of you thought that was an outstanding performance by the All Blacks at Eden Park and that they were really back to their best. Well, we saw when they went to South Africa they weren't, and again in that last part of the game they were found wanting. What's really worrying me so far about the All Blacks, in addition to the selection process that I'm talking about, is their inability to score points in the last half of these games. And then next up is their defensive patterns are not working as well. That first game, if you go back to that game in Wellington where against Argentina, New Zealand were leaking tries in the second half and Argentina came over the top of them and were able to take that game away. Then again in South Africa, we didn't see that tight defence for the whole 80 minutes from the All Blacks. And again this weekend against the Australian Wallabies, it was woeful in the second half as the defensive line fell away again and Australia were able to run in those tries and get back into this game. So as I've said in this video so far, I think all of the teams in this year's Rugby Championship, and therefore all of the coaches, have an issue around their defence, because we've seen in different games how their defensive lines have been going and falling away. So what's my impression so far of Rassie Robertson? I think he's still got a lot to do to prove himself in this position. I would start off with some better selections. He's heading off onto what I think is going to be a very difficult northern tour for the All Blacks. And I'm sure England, Ireland and France have been watching these games on the All Blacks and already plotting on how they're going to take the All Blacks down. So I think this is going to be a crucial period of Rassie Robertson's tenure as he comes into this northern tour. But before we get there, he's got to beat the Aussies in Wellington on Saturday, and that's going to be a job within itself. So if I'm to be brutally honest in this video, and that's what I pride myself on in this channel, is I'd say Rassie Robertson has been the least impressive of all the coaches so far in this year's Rugby Championship. He's got a lot of work to do. He's also got to get his other coaches working well, because it is a team effort, and from a defensive line, I'm just not seeing it at the moment from the All Blacks. Okay, and then finally we've got Dr. Rassie Erasmus. Yes, the South African coach who by many in South Africa is a godlike figure that exists within the rugby world, and there's no doubt about it that Rassie is the leading coach in world rugby at the moment. Possibly right up next to him is Andy Farrell, but I'll give it to Rassie Erasmus at the moment. Now what I want to see from Rassie though is a continuation of what we saw in the weekend. We saw him putting in a team of selected players that he wants to groom for the Rugby World Cup in 2027. These are the kinds of bold selections that I've been expecting from Rassie Robertson that I haven't been seeing, and it's very good that I think Rassie is doing this. He's getting a lot of answers to questions that he's been asking of some of these players, and he's going to be working out how he develops these certain players, whether he keeps them in the squad or whether he brings a new group forward. So I think Rassie's doing a brilliant job out of all the coaches at the moment in terms of squad development, squad growth. And now you ask anybody who's been to the top of world rugby when it comes to coaching, and they'll all tell you the hardest thing to do is to stay at the top of the mountain. So Rassie has to do that by being innovative, by being creative, but by bringing through a group of players who are able to win against any nation in the world. I spoke about this in one of my recent videos about how I think Rassie is going to be putting together a group of 50 players on any given day. He can look at the opposition and say, right, this is what we need to do against that opposition, and therefore this is the team I'm going to put on the park. And that's going to be a very, very powerful key as we head towards the Rugby World Cup. And don't forget, in a Rugby World Cup competition, they're playing a lot of different games. There are going to be injuries, and you want to be able to slot in players who have familiarity with certain positions and they're able to give their top performance. And I think that's what Rassie's working on, and so far he's doing a very good job at that. I think to myself on occasions, what if Rassie was to lose 3 or 4 games? How would the South African public take that? And would they give him as much grace as they would any other coach in world rugby? That would be an interesting one to see. I don't think we're going to see that though. I think the South African team is going to keep on their winning ways, and by rotating the squad in the way that he's doing, he's going to build more growth and more depth. It's going to be a fascinating competition in Nelspruit next weekend. Everybody's thinking South Africa is going to put in their top team and they're going to come back and they're going to trounce Argentina. Well, beware of a team that has a lot of self-belief and they've just beaten the world champions. They can be very, very dangerous no matter where they play in the world. I'm not saying Argentina is going to win the game, but I think they've got a chance, and if any team's got a chance, you should never ever write them off. So as far as the Rugby Championship this year goes, I think Rassie has been definitely one of the top coaches, along with Felipe Kapp, and I'd put Joe Schmidt just under those guys, just Australia in that degree. But I think Rassie is doing what Rassie does. I think Tony Brown coming into that coaching setup was a masterstroke from the South Africans, and we're starting to see Tony Brown's presence in that team. One thing South Africa really needs to look at is their discipline. The other thing they need to focus on is their defense. We saw how it fell away in this particular game, and I know a lot of you are going to say yes, but we'll bring in our A team and everything will be okay. Well, I've also seen it with the A team that when the All Blacks have been running at South Africa, they've been able to put a lot of pressure on the defensive line as well. So those are 2 areas that I think Rassie needs to look at: the discipline within the team, too many yellow cards from the South African, and also the defensive line at times has fallen off and caused some problems for the Springboks. So there you go, there's my thoughts around the coaches so far in this year's Rugby Championship. I would love to know your thoughts in this video as well, so why don't you drop your comments for me? I read them all and respond to as many as I possibly can, so I look forward to hearing all those. Now, as the week goes on, I'm going to be, of course, getting prepared for the last round of this year's Rugby Championship. Plenty more content to come here on Inside Rugby with Mark. If you are enjoying my videos and you enjoy my content, why not choose one or more of these 5 options to be able to support my channel? I do this as a retired bloke because I just love the game of rugby, and I want to share my passion online to maybe help the game grow across the world in a small way. It's been very rewarding for me so far to already find out that we've got a lot of new people to the game who have come to this channel. They're learning about rugby, they're reading all of your comments, and they're understanding what the game is all about. That makes me very, very happy. That's what I want to achieve on this channel, so I thank you for your support in advance. Okay, it's time to say adios from beautiful Mexico, so you stay safe, stay well, keep enjoying your rugby all across the world, and I'll see you again very soon in the next video. Until then, it's bye for now.